So what we have here is a mix of Lionel starter kits, right? And from the MPC era, Fun Dimensions, and into the 90s. They definitely upped the game, you know. That one there is just a very, very simple can motor on top of gears for the geared drive tires, right? No lights, no smoker, no nothing. And it was even designed to run on DC, so they had a real simple DC motor and took the cost out of having a rectifier. Now I put a rectifier in there so I can run it on my AC, but that's about as cheap as it gets. Now this one here is in the same era. This was out of a New Englander set, and it's all plastic. It's not high quality much of anything. It's got things like a light for to show like a fire for the firebox, and it's got a smoker, and it's got a front light. And I'm sure once in its past it had forward and reverse by DC because it's straight DC as well, so there's no cards. Now I put in a card to operate it with this, right? So that basically is its speed control now. And it has a rectifier in the tender, and it's got the card that I can access with Bluetooth for that. But the way it came from Lionel was pretty cheesy, let's be real. You know, quality of the drive wheels and everything is pretty much as low as it gets. I'm sorry, you guys. And then with these, I mean, they really upped the game. These pull, right? Can motor, yeah, there's plastic in them, but they have a die-cast shell, or that straight plastic. That one's got no weight, which is what limits its ability to pull. And I suspect because it's got plastic drive gears, you probably don't want to have the weight and have it pull a lot and wear things out. That's about all the train it can pull right there. You know, but this guy right here, I'll pull 10, 12 cars with that thing. It's also a can motor, and it's got some plastic as well. But it's a much more capable locomotive than that one, and certainly more than that one. And the drive line basically begin to creep over into these, like these switchers. And that's yet another level of quality higher yet again. So this is kind of like a progression. You know, after they went into the dumps with the MPC and the Fun Dimension stuff, it's kind of how they crawl back up and out of there in terms of the quality of the models. These entry-level locomotives, I think, are quite good for what they are. They last a long time. They pull hard. They work. And for a kid, the first locomotive, having something that actually works like that versus has all the bling but doesn't really pull much, probably is why we still have a hobby today. So anyway, humble opinion. Well, this is a 1980s offering. It was an entry-level train. And the fact that it still goes around in circles means it performed that function for somebody for a while. And the pattern of that horizontal can motor is very similar to what came in the future. And this was a 1990s offering that has a similar layout in terms of a horizontal can. Of course, that became fairly common, and K-Line was no different. This has got two horizontally mounted can motors. So where am I going with this? You know, I think I want to, in my opinion, say what the most interesting to me entry-level Lionels were, in my humble opinion, the one that made the most positive impact on the on the hobby, because there is another component to the model train. I'm going to call it an affliction for now. Is, yeah, there's the mechanical side, the toy side, which is what that focused on, and so does this one right here. But there's also a little bit of a historical thing, you know, and that's what grows into the model railroading, trying to actually build almost like artistic displays of points in history that were interesting to a person or people. And the realism and accuracy plays into that part of the hobby. Some people get real serious about it. And of course, in my humble opinion, this really focused more on the toys and really didn't scratch the mechanical itch or the historical itch, not really. Where this one here, in the different road names it was offered in, began to, I think, come up with a solid mechanical device that also had some standing in accuracy and history. The Atlantics were used quite often in passenger service. And it looked good enough and realistic enough that it could trigger that in the model railroad prospect. You know, the prospect of a kid saying, you know something, I want something more realistic. So anyway, in my opinion, my humble opinion, Lionel has done this for a long time. You know, they've had offerings such as this and Scouts since the 40s. And of course, Marx came along and went more with the toys, but there's a fairly strong following for those. K-Line began to blur, start getting back into models. I think this is one of the better offerings from K-Line in the 1990s. In fact, it was one of their most popular. And of course, this one here is, as I said before, is number one for me because it scratched a lot of itches. You know, me growing up in the New York area thought that the New Haven were the best looking. So I always kind of gravitated to that. I thought they were really cool. And they did have ALCOs. And of course, Lionel now offering these, I think, is in the same spirit as this one right here, where it's a solid mechanical locomotive. You know, it's scratches both the toy itch, but has a realistic enough look where it can begin triggering that historical side. You want the road names right, and that spurs the interested kid or a young adult who's really a kid at heart to start reaching back into history to find out what they actually were about, who had the different locomotives, what the different paint schemes were. But that also begins to open up the whole storybook of American history. And to me, to kind of bring it to a conclusion, that's the definition of win. You know, not just the going around in circles, but opening up the layers of interest that span the mechanical electrical side, now the cyber side, but also opens up the interest in the historical side. So, in my humble opinion, for me, that was the most influential Lionel offering in history. But that's for me. There's not a lot of those around. I've got 4 of them, but that was a fairly rare offering because it was only offered in 1962. So I'm going to roll back a little bit and say, while these may not have been a very good offering for the long-term growth of the hobby, but also getting kids interested into the historical side and mechanical side, I would say number one has to be some derivative of the Scouts. And that manifests itself all the way up to these, because that's in the same spirit, a solid lump of metallic toy right there that runs good and looked good enough, close enough that it would spur the interest to get to the next levels of understanding. And that's an honorable mention. The whole Marks series. I'm going to say number 2 is, for me, is the Lionel ALCOs, the FAs, because they were very affordable. And yeah, they may not have been very accurate, but there's a lot of them out there, and they still run. And while not the bottom of the barrel, they were entry level trains. And I'm going to say number 3 has to be some derivative of the Lionel 264s, you know, something like this. Now that's over time, because there's a lot of people who had one of those Lionels, and then that transitioned into a much more serious hobby, but also a pastime that spanned, in my case, a lifetime. So what's on the market today that falls into that category? And this is where it's going to get controversial for me. I think the Lionel offerings around the FT, I think that's right in the same spirit. And the point is that they're on the low end of the cost scale, even though they're a couple $100. But they have the 2 vertical can motors. They have enough electronics and noises and blings and bells and whistles to be interesting to the kids that are growing up on video games and the cyber world. They look realistic enough. I think they're going to run for a fairly long time. They've kind of ditched the Lionel trend towards plastic gears and drive lines with a much more substantial powered truck. So, in my humble opinion, one of these is a current offering, has to be pretty much at the top of the list of what the best entry-level locomotives are, or train sets that are wrapped around those locomotives that's on the market today. I know there's going to be a lot of people who say, well, you have Rail King from MTH, and there isn't a whole lot left of K-Line. They got eaten up by Lionel. And of course, Williams, they're all O scale, so they're pretty much wiped out. The 027 and the entry level stuff. So that's it for me. And I'm going to close this with a little bit of a philosophy. One of the things I learned with the chainsaw world is if you're going to bring somebody into not just work as a tool in a task-specific chainsaw, but somebody who might want to enter into your world, whether it's a kid or a girlfriend or a wife, you don't buy them junk. Because if they go out in the woods with a chainsaw that's a piece of crap, that doesn't work well, doesn't have power, doesn't start easy, all the things that we talk about on my other channel, they walk out with a miserable experience. And that experience stays with them for pretty much the rest of their time. So really you have like one shot to make that first impression. And that was the one shot for me right there. And here I am, many years later, still looking at the same thing.